In this video, I'm going to explain to you why your mobility is still bad after stretching and how to fix it. So the first reason is you're not following up with dynamic mobility. So stretching alone gives temporary relief. It helps the muscle relax, but it doesn't teach it how to contract under that length, which doesn't allow it to build strength in that new range to actually stick. So for example, dynamic mobility is simply just doing your movement. So movement itself, so squats, bend patterns such as RDLs, overhead presses, or just push-ups, those are actually like dynamic movements, mobility movements, because the muscle is lengthening as you're going through that specific movement. So the simple example of this would be instead of doing a hip flexor stretch, you can do a split squat, emphasizing making sure you're keeping a stretch on that hip flexor the whole entire time. That's going to be a dynamic mobility movement compared to just a static hip flexor stretch. So if you decide to do the hip flexor stretch, just make sure to follow it up with a loaded split squat, and that can literally just be with body weight and support. The second thing is that you're not addressing the cause of the stiffness. So more stretching won't help if the underlying issue is actually stability, not flexibility. The body will typically create tension to protect an unstable joint. So those weak or underactive muscles may feel tight because they're actually guarding to protect that joint. So if you're a person that has a lot of mobility, basically you can bend over, you can touch your forehead to your knees. That's an extreme example, but you can touch the floor very easily with the palm of your hands potentially, or in other ranges of motion, you know you have really good mobility. Any type of new tension to you may feel like tightness, so you believe you need to stretch, when in reality, you need to reinforce that stiffness that you feel, and you need to train those weak or underactive muscles and create more stability around that joint. So a simple example for you, the hypermobile person, instead of in your warm-up doing a ton of mobility, a ton of stretching drills, in your warm-up, you want to reinforce those joints by doing some stability work, maybe more single leg activities, maybe more single arm activities that have pauses overhead, or some carries, some dynamic stability type of movements. Strengthening up weaker muscles that don't get that much attention. Maybe the hip flexors you're strengthening a little bit more. Maybe the lateral hip muscles, so your glute medius, maybe you're strengthening that up a little bit more. Maybe your rotator cuff, you're doing more rotator cuff mobility drills, not mobility drills, but strengthening drills and stability drills. This is just going to allow you to reinforce that area and build more stability that's going to protect that joint from your hypermobility that you do have. The third thing is that you don't have enough strength through a full range of motion. If you're weak in those deep ranges of motion, let's say maybe a really deep split squat, maybe a rear footed elevated split squat, your body will prevent you from going into those ranges of motion to protect you from a potential muscle strain or even some type of joint damage. So if you combine some strengthening with the control in those deep ranges of motion, you can get and access more mobility, more range in those deep ranges of motion. So you gradually improve your strength in those deep ranges. So instead of progressing with load, you can progress with range of motion, and that's going to allow you to build strength in those deep ranges of motion, especially if your sport or your hobby requires you to be in deep ranges of motion and have strength in those ranges. You want to progress your exercises more so for mobility and strengthen those ranges than just increasing the load by itself. So instead of increasing the load for a split squat, for your next training cycle, maybe you just do a rear-footed elevated split squat. So now you have to go through a more full range of motion or a deeper range of motion and build strength there. And the fourth thing is that you're not loading the mobility that you've just built. So strengthening those in ranges just teaches the body that those new ranges of motion that you gained are safe. So the key and simple thing here is just to take your movements through that new range of motion more consistently. So if during your warm-up drill, you actually access more range of motion in your workout, you want to take those movements through that full range of motion. If you have some mobility limitations in the squat with your hips, and then you access more during your warm-up, you want to make sure that you do full depth squats. Maybe you even pause in those in ranges so that way that can stick and stay instead of it just going away because you didn't build strength in that range of motion and you did not allow it to stick. So a simple suggestion here, you can combine the passive movement, so your passive stretching, with some dynamic movement, some dynamic stretches, so to speak. And then you can go into your actual movements for your workout that reinforce that and requires you to go into those deep ranges of motion to build the strength that's going to allow it to stick. And there you have it. So if you follow those 4 simple tips, your mobility will dramatically improve and you'll find that you have more strength in those in ranges, which will help you perform better in your sport or your hobby and just feel better overall when you're working out. As always, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.